Hello and welcome to this episode of Pause with Nandini on NRI Affairs. I am joining from Mianjin, which is the unceded lands of the Yagera and Turrbal people. My guest today is Sunita Viswanath, an Indian American activist who has worked extensively in women's and human rights organizations. She is the co-founder and executive director of Hindus for Human Rights. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure, Nandini. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Before we get started with the questions, I did want to do a little introduction. And it was very interesting to see that Sunita has a background in mathematics and sociology. She was born in Chennai, she's lived in India, the UK, and now she lives in America. She's been honored as a White House champion of change for her work with Sadhana, which is a coalition of progressive Hindus that she had co-founded. She's a religious life advisor at Columbia University. In 2021, she was named one of the 21 faith leaders to watch by the Center for American Progress. We will talk about a lot of her background. We'll talk about her work with Hindus for Human Rights, and also what really inspired me to have her on the show as soon as possible was that Sunita was recently on a 10-day trip with a multi-faith delegation to Palestine, along with rabbis for ceasefire, Christians for ceasefire, and the Palestinian organization called Sabil. And she has been writing a Palestinian diary, her Palestine diary in The Wire, and it is the most moving account of what her experience was. And also it just brings to light the human spirit and the utter heartbreak of what is happening right now in Palestine. And I think it's so important to hear from her own experience. So thank you very much again. And I just want to say that Sunita, more than any bio can do justice, she carries this incredible light and this uncommon empathy that inspires all of us.
I don't know what to say except thank you, Nandini. You have a lot of light yourself.
Thank you, Sunita. I want to go to the beginning, right? And I want to trace your journey of how you became an activist and what are some of the significant things that perhaps led you on this path. And also, if you wanted to share any of your early influences, whether they were books or whether they were movements or people who influenced you.
Well, I was born in 1968 in Madras, Chennai, and I would say biggest influence on me, on my life, on the direction of my life is my aunt, my mother's older sister. I called her Amma. My parents raised me, but she raised me. Perhaps even in the formative years, even more than my parents. I lived with her in Madras for 5 years, between the ages of 5 and 10. And she was, well, her name is Kameshwari. She's passed away a few years ago. She was she was the breadwinner of the family. She was incredibly powerful in that way. As a little girl, I went with her and sat quietly when she gave All India radio lectures on various subjects that I didn't even know that she was an expert on. She was the headmistress of a school, a Telugu medium school. And so I went to her school and saw her, as the boss of that entire place. And I walked around like a little mini queen myself in that school and just really looked up to her. But she taught me that there's no absolutes. All of this respect for her, was complete. And yet she was somebody who ran a household where caste and untouchability were practiced. And both of those coexisted. And the other very painful part of the story is that my uncle, her husband, was somebody that I loved unconditionally, but he was also unkind to her. And so again, no absolutes. So from a very, very young age, I was trained to not see black and white, and to somehow find a path that was authentic in that gray area in between. And I think, I wouldn't have known it at the time, but I think looking back, loving people and growing up in an environment where I was loved, which wasn't perfect, and owning that as my roots, I think is one of those undeniable seeds, that were planted early and I'm still living out. Other influences, that was the main one. I grew up in those years in India, going to temples, having that very palpable physical experience of religion, puja, hunger until the end of a puja, waiting for the feast, being told the story, the katha for children at the end, really looking forward to that. In England, I also grew up in England and having, a really, again, very visceral experience of racism in England. Nothing like that have I experienced in the States. In England, I was that hated other much more than I am here in America. And so in the school that I went to, boys had this much, much more than girls, but each day, a boy, a South Asian boy, would be chosen to be the target. And all day long, he knew that he was the one that was chosen that day. And when the school bell rang for the end of school, that boy would run for his life. And if the gang of boys caught him, they would beat him to a pulp. And if they didn't catch him and he made it home, he was scot-free. But the chant of the mob that ran after him was, "We're going Paki bashing." So that was part of growing up. So, just growing up, I also had friends. I also liked it. I had a happy childhood. So again, not throwing away everything from my experience in India or England, finding the nuggets of, beauty and friendship and love that helped me grow and thrive while not denying this dark underbelly. All of that is my.
I love this response so much, Sunita, because in a way it traces so directly to the work you do now, which is being the Hindu voice of resistance and also loving the faith as deeply as you do. And to be able to hold that duality that, there are people we love who are imperfect, there are faiths that have problematic things within them. And in spite of it all, there's beauty and there's hope and there's connection. And your early childhood, it's so powerful to think how those influences stay with us and really dictate our choices and our prerogatives as we get older. And this is such a perfect sort of segue into talking then about faith and what faith means to you. I know as Hindus for Human Rights, there's often a question about why are we talking about human rights from a Hindu perspective? What does it mean to be a Hindu? And all of those questions. So, for you personally, how does the personal and the political play and interact in the work that you do?
Well, I don't do well with boundaries. It's good and bad. It's sometimes not a good thing to be a little incompetent when it comes to boundaries. But as somebody who was brought up in the Hindu faith, the really, the way I understand it at least, and I'm not a theologian, is that there are no boundaries. Whoever you are not just connected to me, you are me and I am you. That there is no other.
Yes.
And this is something that, I'm saying it as words, but deeply, deeply, it was the understanding of the world that I was raised in. And it wasn't told to me. I come from a family where religion was practiced. It was ritualistic. There were no conversations about the philosophy behind the religion.
Mm.
I learned that myself. But I actually think that and I experienced it, doing the rituals takes you to that same place of connection and oneness. I've experienced it myself where you're listening to the chanting, you're in a house of worship, you're in a temple, you're hot, you're sweating, and somehow time has gone by and you've lost yourself in a sort of a beautiful mesmerized state. So and in Hinduism, we are told there's many paths to the same ultimate truth. And and so for me, the path is very physical. It's in doing, it's in being. I don't consider myself, somebody who I read, but that is not my path. My path is I'm karma yogi, if you like.
That's what I thought instantly. Yes, yes.
And so through the doing and the being, I have somehow lived to 56 years, and people do ask me about faith, and we both come from a religion where actually the word faith is, I don't know if the word belongs in Hinduism. It's a religion that has many schools of thought and paths, and we are told they're all equally valid. Maybe there's as many Hindu faiths as there are people who identify as Hindu. I find that very liberating. It's a problem for organizing. And actually, I thought you couldn't organize Hindus because of this. If dharma is so individual, then how do you organize a group of people? And actually, then I saw that the Hindu right was doing a brilliant job of organizing Hindus. So I put that thought out of my head and just, started speaking as a Hindu. Um, People say, what's your practice? What's your sampradaya? My practice is this work we do. My practice is just being a witness to human suffering and doing whatever I can to address it. That's my practice. I don't really feel the need to go to temples, and especially I've been kind of traumatized by the experience of going to the Ram Mandir in Ayodhya, and just being witness to how that temple, the whole movement of Ram Janmabhoomi, how it's been weaponized, and weaponized to justify the erasure of Muslim history and the extermination of Muslim life. I less and less want to step foot in actual physical temples unless they are temples where everybody is welcome. And I also feel that the most important first step of my journey as a Hindu is to call out caste and to denounce caste discrimination. And this is what I'll do. And that's my faith, that's my sampradaya. I connect back, if the sampradaya is religious lineage, I would like my sampradaya to connect back to anybody at all in current times and history who connected their faith, Hindu or otherwise, to caste abolition. And I would like one day to actually find that lineage and trace it and name it. That's where I find myself whole. I'm not a very religious person in that sense of praying and belief. But there were things that happened along the way that made me realize that actually it isn't just human suffering and human rights that motivate me. The abuse and aberration of the faith that I happen to be born into is a violence that I am not okay with. There are a few incidents that happened in, around 2011, 2010, where up until that point, I was showing up to interfaith actions and movements in New York City for the things I care about: women's rights, poverty, immigration rights, and so forth. There's a very strong interfaith movement for social justice in the States. And as I was growing up and as I became an adult, I yearned for Hindus to be among them, but they never were. There are more Hindus showing up now in those spaces, and I'm glad about that. But there was one incident in particular where it was an interfaith vigil for something that was called Park 51. A friend of mine from Kashmir, Daisy Khan, was part of the leadership of that. It was misnamed, incorrectly named Ground Zero Mosque. And it was going to be an interfaith center for interfaith harmony right near Ground Zero, not actually at Ground Zero. And it wasn't going to be a mosque. But there was a far right um, white Christian and Zionist opposition to that Ground Zero mosque. And I had shown up to support the effort with a group of Afghan women. And I was there doing my work and had a passing thought, oh, it would be so nice if there was a Hindu among the people speaking up for this effort. And it was a familiar thought. But in that moment that I had that familiar thought, I heard over a megaphone a Shanti mantra. And I really thought that finally, this thing that I had yearned for, but I didn't see myself as somebody who could, do that work of bringing the Hindu faith to these spaces because I didn't think I knew enough. I didn't think I wasn't raised that way, close to the religion. But it was finally happening, and I can't tell you how happy it made me. It felt like I belonged more completely in that space. I was being represented. And in that moment, I looked up to see where was it coming from. And there was a long line of riot police. And on the other side were the far right contingent that were saying that it was a dishonor to the lives lost on 9/11 to be building this interfaith center right here. And this man, clad in saffron, was there on that side. He was chanting a Shanti mantra against humanity. And that moment is the moment when I made a vow that never again would hate be uttered in the name of my religion without me speaking up. So, and that was also the moment when I realized that I'm a Hindu. I really am. This is not okay with me. And what's the point of me being on this side if I don't speak? And that's a theme for me, in so many spheres. Me being in the space means that I should say something to lift up the unspoken in that space. And I find myself doing that and, making people uncomfortable and gaining unpopularity. But that's what I seem to be doing with my life.
It's so interesting that sometimes we can define ourselves, or those defining moments come when we realize what we are not, you
Yes,
know?
I'm married to a Jewish man. He's an atheist. He doesn't like religion, frankly, and he's a Jew, and he calls himself a political Jew because in the face of what is happening ostensibly in the name of Judaism, he in the negative space, he is a Jew and he stands up as a Jew against the genocide, the occupation, the siege,
Yes.
and through doing and we discovered Jewish Voice for Peace together actually, and we are this couple that is opposing the majority of our community in this way, and we're a tribe in that sense together. But I've seen him evolve. In the beginning, it was this political journey, but and it's been 20 years now, I would say at this point, he is much more comfortable in these alternative spiritual spaces that anti-Zionist Jews are creating. He enjoys being a part of Jewish festivals and Jewish spiritual traditions as they are reimagined to be inclusive and centered in love. And that's been happening for me as well. And he's much less in the space where they're imagining and reimagining rituals and traditions. As you know, Hindus for Human Rights and sadhana, we are much more in the creative space of doing that religious work. If you're anti-caste, and you want, I mean, this is something I'd like us to talk about. If we are anti-caste Hindus and we don't like the thread ceremony for Upanayana, it is incumbent on us to do away with it. I've had 3 sons and none of them have had this ceremony by choice, um, because they've been raised in a house that educates them about what this represents. But then I think, it's incumbent on us to dream up and imagine and create rites of passage ceremonies for our children as they grow up to be empowered in the spiritual traditions that we have to offer them. And it's joyous work. The work can sometimes, this work of fighting caste and fighting Hindu nationalism can be extremely arduous, depressing. There's more brickbats than love. You know that as well as I do. But this work of going back to what can be salvaged from our traditions, and we are Hindus, and Hindus have the absolute liberty to do away, jettison what is not helpful. There's nothing in our traditions that says we have to follow any book to the letter. And so, again, another thing that liberates me. But this work of creating the path, creating new rituals, or reimagining old ones is true joy for me. And I think it's the work that gives oxygen to my sails.
No, absolutely. I think it's wonderful to have to sort of reclaim the faith or the traditions in a way that makes sense to us. And this is what we're sort of, again, this is the work really, to stop it from being defined in such narrow, prescriptive ways, which only confine and they don't liberate. So this is beautiful. And as you said that, some of that work has to happen in our homes. In fact, all of that work has to eventually come home. And, even with caste, some of the work that we've done at NRI Affairs, which is sort of confronting the fact that caste oppression still exists. It is not something that's in the past just because maybe you don't see it as overtly. And also that whole idea of taking accountability and taking ownership of the fact that we are beneficiaries of a deeply flawed system of hierarchy, and therefore it is incumbent on us to, at least the first step is acknowledge. And and that's
we're not in the we don't proselytize. If somebody, has a different path and could care less about reclaiming Hinduism, more power to them. I hope, we all hope that they will do social justice work in their personal lives and in the world in whatever way it makes sense. But when I go into the world, especially when I go into a temple or a Hindu gathering, a South Asian gathering, I look around and I do have some ultimately faith in humanity still somehow. And I can't believe that the majority of humans or the majority of Hindus are genocidal and Islamophobic and hateful and, are proud of the caste system and love, the Hindu nationalist movement that is dividing our community. I just don't believe that. And
I don't either.
what I found is that people don't have it for some reason. I mean, in history, people did, but now in our times, Hindus and Indians don't have it in our imagination that Hinduism can be reclaimed. But when we show it, when we do it, it happens every time. People will come, young people will come and say, "Oh my God, that's so beautiful. I've never seen something like this. I've never seen a Hindu prayer in a climate action rally. I've never seen that before. What organization is this?" And so there's I think it's from the Bible, no, it's not. It's the name of an organization, Make the Road by Walking. I feel we are making the road by walking.
By walking. I love that.
There's no choice really but to do this. I don't think you can turn back from who you are. And for those of us who, for for better or for worse, we are closest to the Hindu religion and culture. And if we don't, if we denounce that or just are silent about that, it doesn't go away. You walk into most of our homes,
And
it's a
it's there.
Ganesha that you see. It's the food that we eat, the music that we listen to. It's certainly not a Muslim home when you come into my home. Um,
It's
I
there, of
come from an
course.
upper caste. I come from an upper caste. I cannot talk about it, but it's the truth. And so, yeah, I mean, if somebody doesn't want to identify as Hindu, that's fine, but they're still walking around with the privilege that comes with that.
Yes,
And I would
sure.
say, for those who are comfortable enough to do it, in spite of, yes, Hindu faith, Hindu, the thousands of years of legacy of Hinduism has a lot of blood on its hands. No denying it. I would argue that we don't have more blood on our hands than other religions and other ideologies. I guess we could argue that, but that's what I think. And I don't think it's beyond salvaging. Um, I think there's a lot. I mean, I believe deeply that there's a lot in Hindu philosophy, Hindu texts that can resource us for a world which gives dignity to every human being, and not to mention every, creature, every aspect of this planet. I think there's those resources in our texts and in our teachings. We shouldn't throw those out, I believe,
No,
with the
absolutely.
with the um, with the atrocities that have been committed with caste and so forth. And it's not everybody's work, but it's our work, and we're doing it. And what I would say to people for whom this is not their journey is, it's in everybody's interest that some of us do this work, because, and this is a strategic um, point, but also an ethical point. Um, Hindus are, they exist. They are the majority community in India and the Indian diaspora. Um, by So strategically, by not allowing Hindus to organize ourselves, or not validating or affirming or supporting the work of Hindus to organize ourselves for all things good, I think that is a strategic mistake, because there is no other way that we will annihilate caste and defeat Hindutva. We need Hindus in that fight. But ethically, um, it just, I don't know how to say, how to, it's so obvious to me that to deny a, a group of people's path towards their own, salvation, their own affirming of human rights and dignity, it's a losing argument. It doesn't benefit anyone. It only takes away from the person doing that denying. And so, while it's not everybody's journey, I would ask everybody on the progressive side of things, the left, to really think hard about, this may not be for you, but in what way can you make space for a group of people that are doing sincere social justice work as Hindus in the movements of which you are part?
Yes, and one of the obvious challenges is that this kind of thinking um, is still in a minority where you actually go out and do the work. There may be people, like you said, that I don't believe most Hindus are Islamophobic or genocidal. However, many people are silent, and in their silence there is an allowing of what passes for being a Hindu. And that's why this work is important. I do want to ask you though specifically, what are some of the challenges in this resistance from within, and what are some of the roadblocks that you faced?
To your point about the silence, I think it's human nature that we don't get activated until the monster comes for us.
Hmm.
And we will realize that this monster of hatred, division, nationalism, Islamophobia, that, family of evils, it doesn't just come from Muslims. It will eat at us, and we will wake up each in our own time to the horrors of hate. But I think that in the Hindu community, in my extended family, there's a real sense, a luxury of being able to close our eyes. There's the fact that we've been poisoned by, a biased media, and truths have been kept from us by a censored, curated media. That's part of it. And yeah, there's just this sort of lack of awareness and a sense that whatever it is, we are not. We keep our head down and take care of our. We've got enough to worry about, and we don't want to get into trouble. And but then actually, there's a person from the organization NAMTA, North American Manipur Tribal Association, who told me this story that the day that this current episode in Manipur of this current war, fighting and crisis that's happening, May of last year was when it started, and she told me that the day before that, she's an educated, wonderful person who is living a very fruitful life in the States. But the day before that, she actually didn't know that she didn't really know about the problems in India, the BJP government, the division, the assaults on people dissenting, the threat to the democracy. She didn't know any of that. And then on May 4th of last year, her family's home was burned down. And suddenly she learned everything in one fell swoop. And so she told me she cannot look at somebody who's not awake and aware with any judgment, because that was her just yesterday. And I remember that each time I meet somebody who, it's very frustrating when I meet people who really aren't paying attention. It's in the front pages of the major newspapers of the world. I mean, there's really no excuse to not know. And I was just, as you know, in Palestine, and I went into Tel Aviv on the day that there was the massive strike, and there were hundreds of thousands of people in the streets. And we spoke to a few of the people protesting, and I realized that, and the one young woman that I had met in particular was crying, and she was extremely upset about her own Israeli democracy that she said was under threat, and the hostages that weren't coming home, and so forth. And she was genuinely, protesting, putting her body there in the protest. But she didn't see. I didn't want to engage her in that moment on it. That wasn't what I was there for. But she did not mention Palestine. She did not mention Gaza. I don't know if she knew about it. But it seemed very obvious to me that she had a different, same as in India, she had a different set of news items that were reaching her, a different set of issues tugging at her heart. And yeah, I think that when she realizes that Israel's actions in Palestine, the genocide in Gaza, but what I saw with my own eyes, which is a slower, nevertheless, genocide in the West Bank, is making her unsafe. That is what is jeopardizing what she calls Israeli democracy. When she makes that connection, that this hateful, genocidal mission is what is causing the crisis that she was in the streets for, when she makes that connection, she'll see fully. But I think that the silence on the part of Hindus is because we haven't made the connection, and we haven't realized that we are. And people told this to me on the trip to Palestine in such beautiful, I wrote about it in such beautiful poetic language, that this one particular person, Tanya Nasser, who's the godmother of a young 23-year-old who's under arbitrary detention, Leanne Nasser, who was just picked up in a nighttime raid for no reason, no evidence, no trial. And it reminded me so much about what's happening in India. Umar Khalid, Khurram Parvez, so many others are just, their arbitrary detention is like our UAPA. There's no difference. And this Tanya, the godmother, who's 83 years old, she said that our anger in the international, community is the only hope of the people of Palestine, and that she didn't express it as a doubt. She knew that the international community that is complicit in this genocide, Israel, it is absolutely a question of existential threat to our humanity, ours. It is a question of existential threat to the existence of the Palestinians, but it is also a question of our existence as humans who can feel. And she actually said that this genocide that is happening, the struggles to exist of the Palestinian people, she sees it as a gift of the Palestinian people to the world, because in seeing it, we will find our own salvation. And she's offering this at a time when the majority of the Jewish community is, as you're saying, silent on the issue of what's happening to Palestinians. They don't see it. And we have a mini version of that happening in the country where we are from.
It's almost like these patterns repeat over and over and over again until the lesson is learned. And I don't know when the lesson will be learned. But when you were talking about your experience in the UK of that boy who would be picked and then he would run and people would chase, I had such a visceral image in my head of the Gaurakshaks chasing a boy on suspicion of, selling beef or transporting cattle or whatever it is. And it just it made that connection so strongly for me, that because you've seen this, you've experienced, you've almost felt that fear, is why you can understand and why you stand against this othering and this hate. And it's
Yes.
this making that connection to things that you are witnessing right now, and being able to see that if we don't stop it now, that's where we're going. You know
I
what
met
we,
the people at Tent of Nations, it's called. And it's a 33-year-old struggle of this family trying to keep their land near Bethlehem on this hilltop. And
I
you
read
can see
that.
all around, you can see these very lavish looking settlements. And somehow, because this family managed to have papers, they've managed to keep their struggle going. And the Dawood Nasser, the director, the main person we spoke to, he was so moving, and he talked about their struggle being a nonviolent struggle, and refusing to hate, refusing to react to the violence. And I also have a good friend who lives in Bethlehem. His name is Abdul Fateh Abusru. He runs an organization called Al Rawad, and that organization empowers kids through the arts. And he told me that Abdul Fateh told me that when his parents fled at the time of the Nakba, they taught their children that they must never pick up weapons, because then you become animals. You become them. If you pick up weapons, you will never do it. Now Abdul Fateh has lived through from that time till now. He grew up at some point. I mean, I don't know how old he is. He's in his 50s. So he has seen the last 5 decades of unabating violation of rights, dehumanization, and then the siege, the occupation. He's seen the wall come up. He couldn't, for the first 9 years of his marriage, his wife was in Jerusalem, he's in Bethlehem. For the first 9 years of his marriage, he could not go the 10 kilometers to be in the place. They couldn't travel they did manage to get around this, and there's ways to sneak around as young youth in love, but the wall came up, and the I've seen this. It's called the apartheid system in the West Bank. I saw it. There are different roads. If you want to get from point A to point B as a Palestinian on a Palestinian road, there's no guarantee you will get to your appointment, because there will be checkpoints, new checkpoints, blocked roads, like you have to get off the car, the bus, get checked, you might be sent back. There's no, this is in a way, a minor point, in the face of actual blowing up of villages and, children's body parts being scattered, so that they're unrecognizable. The inconvenience of the daily life there is a minor point, but it is, Abdel Fattah has grown up with this. He's never been able to say, okay, I'll see you at 4 p.m. and make it. Anyway, so he was telling me that he's created this organization that empowers youth through the arts, but he does not tell the youth that they should not pick up a weapon. Every day, he showed it to us. The wall that is the wall that snakes throughout the West Bank, and certainly separates the occupied territories from what is called Israel, but also separates Palestinians from Palestinians, for instance, a man and his wife. It has at regular intervals these watchtowers from which soldiers, snipe. They shoot at Palestinians. He has grown up with armed soldiers, guards, police watching. I mean, there is constant surveillance. There is minute by minute feeling of we are being watched and killing. And we're not talking about Gaza, we're talking about the West Bank. He cannot, in good conscience, tell a young person they don't have the right to fight violence with violence. He has created an organization that works in the Aida refugee camp where his parents came when they fled the Nakba. And he hopes that he's creating something, he calls it the beautiful resistance. He hopes that children will choose resisting through love, through poetry, through art, through song, through dance. But he does not take the position of his parents. He cannot, in good conscience, presume to tell a person who has a gun to their head not to fight back.
Gosh, this is so hard to even process, and I'm sure you're still processing it because till you actually go there and see it with your own eyes,
Yes,
there's a difference, isn't it, Sunita,
there
from before?
really is.
Right?
Until then, I was committed to this struggle because of everything I had seen, photographs, videos, documentaries, books, articles. My husband, as I said, is an anti-Zionist Jew. He is extremely up to date and informed on all of this. And I see the connections to my own struggle as a Hindu fighting Hindutva and caste. So I thought I couldn't be more committed. But actually, when you see it with your own eyes, what I've come back with is a certainty that the goal is the extermination of the Palestinian people. They want to get rid of all of it. They have been working on this project for 7 decades plus, and they are accelerating the project. It's chilling, but all of these different strategies, the full-on genocide in Gaza, the apartheid through the wall and the highways and all of that, the rationing and denial of food, water, the rationing of things like internet, the decimation of anything like a healthcare system. All of it. There are different strategies. When you add them all together, the Israel just put pressure on the US to pressure South Africa to step
Withdraw.
up its
Yeah.
advocacy. Just all those, so that's another strategy, the leveraging of political access and influence. If you put it all together, there is no question in my mind. The arming of settlers to go and by force take away land illegally, and the Israeli state putting its legal imprimatur on the settlers' claims to land. that's another strategy that we saw everywhere we went. So yeah, I think when you put it all together, it is a full-on genocidal mission, not just in Gaza, but in all of Palestine. And they want Palestine not to exist.
All of it.
And the term from the river to the sea originated on the Zionist side. And what they meant by it is what they accuse us of when we say from the river to the sea in protest. We say human rights for everyone from the river to the sea. They mean Israel from the river to the sea.
From the river to the sea.
You had asked earlier about other and connection and seeing the connection between different things and different movements, different peoples, different contexts. And you're absolutely right. And we started off the conversation by me saying I'm really bad at boundaries. I really think that's the core of what drives me. Not just not seeing boundaries, but refusing to be told there are boundaries between me and anything. When I started working in Afghanistan, when I was like 30 years ago, much younger woman, there was an Afghan activist who told me over a long, very painful phone call that I should not be mobilizing people to address Afghanistan. I'm not Afghan. I'm not Muslim. I will bring harm by, delving in issues that aren't mine and so forth. My two older kids were little back then. They were just tiny ones. And I remember as I was listening to this woman on the phone, looking at that and just knowing in my bones that this is what she is saying. It denies my understanding of my purpose on this earth. I do not want to raise these little kids in a world where they cannot assert their humanity anywhere they want to. And we should act responsibly. We should understand that, some people face the brunt of any particular injustice the most, and their voices are important. And we should understand about positionality. And I think that we do, good people do understand that positionality intuitively. And yet our movements for justice need this internationalism. That is what every Palestinian that I met told us. We were there at a time of escalated violence. We did not say, we are Americans, we are complicit. Who are we to come and shine a light on the atrocities taking place? We, in an instant, without hesitation, said, our humanity requires us, our complicity requires us to go and be witness. And Omar Harami is the director of the organization Sabil, that was our on-the-ground coordinators, and also they, my gratitude to them, they kept us safe. They figured out where we should go and where we shouldn't go, and we all got home safe. Omar one day said this. He said, there are two kinds of people. There are the ones that organize themselves and fall in line behind identity. This particular group of people has the right to speak on this. We take our cues from them, and that is what we do. There's another kind of people who organize themselves and fall in line behind a set of principles. And it doesn't matter who is espousing those principles, we will fall in line behind them. And this person, Omar, and I, certainly, I'm in that second group. And around me are people who are very motivated in the first way of operating. And I don't want to say it's right or it's wrong. I just don't prescribe to that. By that token, I should celebrate Rishi Sunak. I should vote for Kamala Harris just because she is brown, et cetera, et cetera. Yes. And on this, it's another very interesting point. On the trip just now, I've just come back. On the trip to Palestine, what I realized is that there was a difference between the people on my delegation who were American, few of them Palestinian American, most of them Jewish and Christian American, there were a couple of us. Me and my friend Zarni are Hindu and Buddhist, but we were minority. And what I noticed is that the Palestinians who live in Palestine had much less of a hard time holding hands with people, with Israelis who were against the occupation, against the genocide, maybe still to some extent identified as Zionists, maybe weren't fully aligned politically, maybe there was a light of day between us, but because they were living there and faced the most devastating impact of this brutality, I could see them being okay, having a conversation with, being seen in a photograph with, visiting, having dialogue with people who maybe were not fully 100% aligned. Whereas us, the Americans who came from here, had a real issue with that and felt that it was a real problem to visit the kibbutz along the border, which was attacked on October 7th, to be seen in the protests in Tel Aviv that happened on the day of the strike, that there was a lot at stake, in being seen as potentially, having room in our hearts for Zionists. And this wasn't such a problem for Palestinians. And this was also my experience in Afghanistan, that the people in Afghanistan who at this point have to live this devastating reality of life under the Taliban, there's a different perspective they have on what the world should do with the Taliban than the diaspora Afghans and those of us who support the struggle. And my I guess all of this is a confirmation for me of the power of grassroots activism. There's many kinds of activism. There's the kind which is like political advocacy. There's getting involved in running for office, that kind of political path to something like justice. And there's, advocacy through scholarship. There's many paths. My path has always been the most grassroots form of activism. And if you have that inclination, then you have to meet people where they are. You can't be a grassroots activist and come to the grassroots and tell people what they should think and what they should do. You have to be there humbly, listen to where people are, and decide if that's that's a place where you can be. And that's what I've done my whole life. And that's where I don't have a PhD. I'm not armed with. My friend Zarni, who's that genocide scholar, was on this trip with me, and every step of the way his head was full of knowledge from being a scholar. My knowledge comes from meeting people, talking with them, holding them, touching them, holding their children, listening to them. That's my path. And what I learned on this trip is that the people whose lives are literally in the crosshairs in Palestine want people who are not them, people in the world, to connect with them. They want international delegations to come. They don't see that as appropriation. They feel safer when internationals are present, providing protective presence. It literally reduces the violence by the settlers and the soldiers, and they are less judgmental about talking to somebody who doesn't have the same opinion. And I think that comes from your life being in danger. It comes from not having the luxury of analysis because you're at a distance and you're somewhat theoretical about these issues. It also, I think that, and I speak for the Indian diaspora too, I'm not judging anybody. This is my own diaspora as well. There's a guilt that we feel for not being there on the front line, of having escaped it, of having that privilege. And the way that we sometimes express that guilt and compensate for it is to be, rather self-conscious of our positionality, which results in this kind of purity, impurity in, in movement building. And I always get a confirmation of what I know in my heart, which is that there's no difference between if there's a little baby being killed in Palestine, in what logic do I not have the right to grieve it, to grieve that atrocity, and to do whatever I can in my human power about it, wherever that atrocity is happening? I will never ever prescribe to that. For Omar's framing, the first category of,
Identity.
an Indian has more of a right to speak about what's happening in India. Among Indians, Muslims and Dalits have more right to speak about what's happening in India. A Palestinian has more right to speak about what's happening in Palestine. Sometimes I think, somebody who's not right there in trauma might have clarity of vision to offer something that could really, really find a path forward. That's not a crazy thought. We need all of us to band together across geography, across experience, across privilege, to fight the systems of oppression, which only benefit the leaders in all of the countries and contexts. They are the ones who are benefiting from these oppressive systems. We need to band together against it. We just had yesterday the debate of Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. And I felt like throwing up after it because they didn't talk about Gaza. An American citizen was just killed in a place where we were supposed to go, actually, and we didn't go.
I know,
it
yes.
feels very close. It feels very, very,
personal. Yes.
Yes. And you would think that the journalist would ask, an American citizen was just killed with American weapons, American-funded weapons. What do you both have to say about it? There is such a complicity of media and both parties to erase and ignore what is happening Kamala Harris, the minute she talks about an arms embargo, I would be much more inclined to get behind, all of my friends who are trying to, not elect Donald Trump. I can't do it. She's part of the system that is killing Palestinian babies right now.
And it's not enough. What she's saying is not enough, is it? No. It's not enough.
She's not saying anything. She's not even calling for a true ceasefire. It's not just not enough. It's nothing. It is actually, we had two, and she said it clearly. She said, I can't repeat it to you, but she basically said that she stands with Israel. She will always stand with Israel. So we have two candidates who are vying for who stands more with Israel. That's what we saw last night, as we are obliterating an entire people.
I follow so many of these Palestinian and the resistance sites. And yesterday, for the first time, one of the sites that's been very vocal and, saying we must organize and we must do this and do that, it just sounded like in a very soft voice, there was a message that said, whatever we have been doing for some reason is not working because they're not stopping. And it felt, it felt like a small child's voice, almost bewildered at the inhumanity of the grown-ups who just cannot see what they're doing. And this is their...
We must keep doing it. We must keep the little things that we've been doing. I mean, the lack of hope it was the weight over the whole trip, that people were continuing to struggle, not stepping back from struggle. But if you talk to them about what would happen the next day, they didn't think they would win. Each person that was defending their land seemed to be quite sure that the land would be taken from them.
Would be good.
There was a grim outlook. And yet they keep struggling, they keep fighting, And we, whatever things that we are doing, the protests, the boycotts, the op-eds, the whatever it is, there are
Everything.
people who are standing with placards in gas stations to say this oil is, is part of the reason for this genocide. Whatever I mean, it feels like it's not making a dent, but I have to have faith that it's all making some kind of a dent.
And we have
And
to do
and
it.
then there's the ultimate Hindu teaching that you don't do it for that anyway. You do it because it's what you have to do for yourself to be true to authentically to yourself and who you are. And at the end of the day, that's all you've got. You've got today. You don't know if you have tomorrow. So did you act true to your spirit today? If not, got to get to it.
I love that. I love that. And as we come to the close of this conversation, that honestly, I could do another 3 hours of talking to you about this. But you've answered it in different ways, but I still want to ask you that this is very difficult work, but it's also very joyous work because, as you said, at the end of the day, you feel like you have added some meaning to your life with the work that you do. How do you keep yourself resilient, whether spiritually resilient or even to have some hope that, it's all leading to something, and even if it's not, it's enough. The fact that you're there in the front lines.
Well, I I think I must say that I am very lucky, fortunate to enjoy the love of my family, my husband. It's it's the thing that I mean I've just come home to it. I'm feeling it so massively. And it's my fuel when I am sad. It's what envelopes me. I'm very lucky to have this love in my life. I was joking with you earlier about our Hindu traditions tell us about detachment, but I think it's a big lie, and I am as attached as can be. Um, and I'm attached to my loving family, and that definitely keeps me grounded, validated. And when the whole the workspace, the movement space becomes very cruel, I definitely have this touch point, which is unconditional. And then there's this, I'm getting a bit personal here, but I had a spectacular divorce about 20 years ago. And that divorce brought home to me that you can believe a whole set of things. You can believe in someone, you can, have a certain understanding of your reality, your relationships, um, what you bring to them, what they bring to you, and you can operate in that with blinders on, honestly. And it's possible for all of that. For me, it was everything I knew to just explode and disappear. It's not like Gaza exploding. It's one person's life, and it happens. This happens. It's just part of life. But for me, I was left standing, kind of brand new, with nothing that I could count on, nothing that I had to reassess. Who am I and what do I believe in? And that, so there's many things in my life that have liberated me. And that moment liberated me. After that, it kind of didn't matter. I could be myself without voices in my head telling me what I should be. I could just be myself and do the things that I decided myself that were important to me. And that wasn't the case before. And so this process of rebirthing myself has really given me the courage and confidence to not care about what anybody would think. If somebody has a different opinion to me, they're welcome to it. I'm still going to go along this path, very, very open to admitting, mistakes and new learnings and evolution. But yeah, and the other thing that liberates me is the fact that we happen to come from a religious tradition that tells you that, I mean, the Bhagavad Gita, which is important book to me, tells me, and I say this to young people all the time, to use it against their oppressive parents, it is better to do your own dharma imperfectly than somebody else's dharma perfectly. So I feel free to live fully, learn fully, make mistakes and learn from them, and not work, always have meaningful dialogue, but not let people push me around. I'm going to tell you about the bamboo. Around the time that I was reeling and recovering from my world exploding, I took a yoga class. And the yoga teacher, when we would stand in asanas, she would come around and try and push us. And most of us fell over. And she said that each of us, not just in this yoga class, but in life, has to be a bamboo. Because a bamboo is so rooted into the ground. It knows what its center is. It knows what it believes in. And you cannot push it over. But you can put pressure on it and it will bend and sway. So we should, all of us, be open to the breezes and the winds that come and the opinions that aren't ours. We should be open to learning and evolving, but we should never be so open that our center is crushed.
That's a gorgeous
bamboo.
I love it. I absolutely love it. And I have to say, as you're speaking, I can just see this whole embracing of your humanity with all that it means, even if it means not being perfectly detached and sage-like and having those attachments and holding on to all of that, but also having so much of the divinity that, the Hindu faith actually talks about in such joyous ways and not in the narrow prescriptive ways that we're all sort of trying to move away from, which is the whole Hindutva narrative. And I absolutely enjoyed listening to your your background, your early influences. It was so moving to hear about Gaza and your experiences there. And I'm sure not just me, but all our listeners, all the viewers will get so much wisdom and so many things to think about after this conversation. So thank you for your time. I know you've just come back and you're probably quite jet lagged. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Nandini.